began reading, the year of living biblically, one man's humble quest to follow the Bible as literally as possible. The author A.J. Jacobs identifies himself as secular, although officially Jewish. His project to follow all of the Bible's rules and injunction is in part motivated by a desire to understand biblical literalism, and also admittedly motivated by the desire to write a book. Jacobs notes how deeply our society is affected by people who claim to take the Bible literally. He notes that the effect that this claim has on our foreign policy, on education policy, funding for scientific research, and even where one can buy beer on a Sunday. But even with his very little biblical knowledge, he instinctively understands that no one actually follows the Bible literally. Jacobs writes, "My suspicion was that almost everyone's literalism consisted of picking and choosing. People plucked out the parts that fit their agenda, whether the agenda was to the right or to the left. Not me, I thought with some naivete. I would peel away the layers of interpretation and find the true Bible underneath. I would do this by being the ultimate fundamentalist. I'd be fearless. I would do exactly what the Bible said, and in so doing, I'd discover what's great and timeless in the Bible and what is outdated." So Jacobs reads the Bible in order to prepare himself for this year-long project. Having never read the Bible before, he undertakes a task with great seriousness, reading for 5 hours a day, 7 days a week, for 4 weeks straight. He explains his approach saying, "As I read, I type onto my PowerBook every rule, every guideline, every suggestion, every nugget of advice I find in the Bible. When I finish, I have a very long list. It runs 72 pages, more than 700 rules, and the scope is astounding. All aspects of my life will be affected. The way I walk, the way I talk, the way I eat, bathe, and hug my wife." The rest of the book is Jacob's chronicle of an entire year spent trying to follow the rules on those 72 pieces of paper. He changes his diet, he attaches tassels to the corners of his clothing, and he grows a beard. He has an expert come in with a microscope to identify which pieces of clothing are made of mixed fibers and thus must be tossed. His descriptions of this year are outrageously funny, but it does leave one wondering, can following the lifeless injunctions on 72 pieces of paper really be what God's law is all about? The psalmist exclaims, "The law of the Lord is perfect. The law rejoices the heart. It is enlightening, more to be desired than gold, sweeter than honey." Anyone who has ever survived elementary school knows that most people do not have such adoring reactions to rules. Especially rules that don't make sense to us. Complicated rules that make a list of 72 pages. I remember in my middle school, everyone's favorite substitute was Mrs. Morris. We liked her because she always introduced herself by saying that she had only one rule, and that rule was no homework. We don't like rules, especially rules that we don't understand or seem to be without purpose. And there are more ominous reasons that we have a negative reactions to the Bible's rules. We also don't like rules because in our lives, rules often carry the risk of rejection. What happens to our relationship with God when we don't follow the rules? What happens to our relationship when the established rules are broken? Rules are often experienced as establishing the conditions upon which a relationship can continue. And when they are violated, the consequences can be serious. I had a friend in seminary who had a terrible problem as a youth minister. In the course of her work, she discovered that a 15-year-old girl in her youth group had been kicked out of her parents' house. The scenes of this 15-year-old broke her parents' curfew by 1 hour. Her parents kicked her out that night. This 15-year-old packed up her little backpack and wound up on my friend's doorstep begging for a place to stay. These parents enforced their rule apart from any context of love or grace. This story disturbs us because the consequences were so severe. We expect that parents will enforce rules, but will do so in a context of forgiveness and strive to be with their children. We expect that within families and friends, rules, spoken or unspoken, are always accompanied by love and grace. In fact, we hope that parents create rules out of a desire to be close to their children. A curfew is put in place, after all, to ensure that a teenager comes home. But I think this is part of why we often don't like the rules. In our world, people aren't always motivated by love when they make or enforce the rules. In fact, some communities, some churches even make extra rules for the purpose of keeping others out. When I was in college, I was a member of an extremely conservative Christian church. And this church had all kinds of rules that were used to define the community. The community I experienced inside the church was very close and felt wonderful. But there were many rules that defined who was a part of this group and who was not. It was clear that good Christians, members of this community, didn't drink, mothers didn't work outside the home, and all church members were, of course, a part of the Right to Life movement, and the list of rules goes on and on. Breaking these rules meant expulsion from the community. If not officially, it would certainly be true socially. And I suspect that this is the context of Christian rules that gives many of us such a negative impression of the biblical law. Rules without a context of love and grace often threaten rejection or even oppression. In such an environment, rules seem to say, I love you unless. So why does this psalmist love God's 72 pages of rules? Those pages certainly seem to contain many, many possibilities of rejection by God. The answer, I think, is that